advisor to community. Wonderful. Sole transfer admission officer in the office, high school and CBO counselor. Wonderful. So just among the people who have responded, we've already got a great range of types of expertise. And my hope is that this conversation can be a conversation and not just a lecture. And we can all learn from one another as we talk about how to advise those students who have something difficult to explain. So Tina, if you don't mind putting up the text of this slide, just forward one slide. This is me, so you can all see what I look like. And Tina, when you get a chance, you'll put up the text. The next slide will have text. Just forward a slide.
Is it showing?
No, it's staying on the same slide. That's just my picture. There we go. All right, now one more. So the reason why I'm here, so go ahead and do one more. I'm not seeing the slides moving. Or I just had one. We need one more. So I'll say what's supposed to be on the next slide. I'm here primarily because I flunked out of high school and got a GED. That is the big reason that led to my career as a counselor now. So Tina, if you could keep trying to forward that slide, that'd be great. In addition to flunking out of high school and having a GED, I am also a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School. And so that story led to this project that I've got now. So let me go ahead, and I'm going to say if I can't see the slides, that it's better for me to just if we can't advance the slides, I'll just look at them myself so that I remember what we're going to say. And
you might be able to advance the slides now. Can you try it?
I'm sorry, you're asking if I can. There we go. All right. So let's run back one to the one that we couldn't cover. The arrow keys aren't working. Okay, this is, there we go. Okay, super. Okay, so I've been doing this since 1999. This is perfect. Thank you so much. And I specialize in working with kids who have lost their way or ruined their records. And so I see kids of every kind of crisis. So forward one slide. Perfect. So we're going to talk today about the problem. You know, any of the students who are in this category, we're going to talk to them. We're going to talk about how to talk to them and teaching them to talk about it in a way that other adults are going to understand. Okay, forward. Perfect. So the hardest cases, what are we talking about here? We're talking about psychiatric issues. And I know everybody in the room, I'm sure, has dealt with students who are dealing with depression and anxiety, possibly also with eating disorders, with major psychotic disorders like schizophrenia in the most severe cases. I see lots of students who have been disciplined either by the first college or by their high school and have to explain that expulsion or that suspension that's on their record. Many of us have worked with kids who've been through the criminal system and have to talk about that. We see lots of students who are survivors of substance use and abuse, who hopefully are in recovery from addictions. I've worked with 230 students in the last 8 years who have been involved with Title IX, who, in other words, who have been either accused of sexual misconduct on campus or who are survivors of sexual misconduct on campus. This year, I've been seeing students who were in trouble for leaving quarantine dorms or who threw a party in violation of COVID standards. And I even a couple of years ago worked with 6 of the families who were involved in the Varsity Blues scandal, who were, you know, that was the criminal admissions scandal, whose parents were going to jail for bribing schools. And so those were very, very tough kids to explain to new schools about why they should get another shot. So these are the kinds of categories that I'm thinking about. So next slide, please. Thank you. So thinking about who else is on the team is really important. One person in the chat was mentioning that they're the sole transfer admissions reader in their office. This is something where collaboration is really valuable. You know, you may have a lot or a little knowledge about a particular problem, like maybe there's been someone in your family who has struggled with addiction and you are very knowledgeable about the recovery process, or maybe this is something that's new to you, but reaching out to your colleagues around your institution can help you to collaborate and serve these kids who may have it may be extra tough to advise them properly. So next slides. So the first question your student may ask if you're on the counseling side is, do I have to disclose this? And this is language that many institutions use on the Common App. Obviously, there are many different platforms that institutions use to allow transfer students to apply, but this is pretty typical language for those institutions that choose to ask a disciplinary question. This is very common language. Have you ever been found responsible? And it includes, but not limited to, probation, et cetera, expulsion. So next slide. I'm aware that this text is probably too small to read, which is exactly the point I'm making here. This was taken from the University of Alabama application, and there are some schools like Alabama that have incredibly searching, clearly lawyer-written requests for disclosure. So for example, have you ever personally received a written warning not to trespass? Have you ever received a restraining order, protective order, or similar directive to avoid contact, right? So Alabama's lawyers did a very thorough job writing questions that ask about any possible wrongdoing on the part of this student, and notice that the way they phrase it, you don't have to have been found responsible. They're asking about accusations and protective orders that may have occurred long before there was any kind of finding by the institution. Next slide. All right, one more slide, please, to get the text here. Perfect. Third-party disclosure. This is something else to think about. This has been a big change in my practice during the pandemic. I was initially thinking, you know, my work happens because students have gotten into trouble, usually involving sex, drugs, or alcohol. And we conducted this crazy experiment on our kids in the last couple of years where we locked them all in their parents' basement for a year or more at a time to see what was going to happen then. And as I'm sure all of you discovered, this was a struggle for many, many students. And I wondered, are they going to be able to get in trouble? You know, they have many of their risk-taking behaviors are going to be limited by the lack of availability. So what's going to happen? And it turned out that what happened was they started increasing their misuse of social media, and third-party disclosure became a huge part of what I was seeing. In other words, my student has been admitted to college. It's now the summer. And a third party, usually a classmate or sometimes a parent, is tweeting at the college that admitted them saying, did you know about this offensive text that your admitted student sent 3 years ago? And they're tweeting at or emailing the college with the result that the college then is reaching out to the student and saying, would you please respond to this accusation that you sent this inappropriate, sexist, racist, bullying, whatever stupid and wrong thing that you may have done in the past. And in many cases, the colleges are rescinding the acceptance when they receive that. So that has been a big change in the pandemic. So next slide, please. So what about the students who do need to disclose? Either they're being asked that question or they have reason to think that a third party is going to tell colleges if they don't. This is the metaphor that I use for my students and how this feels, how it felt for me trying to apply to four-year colleges with straight Fs from my last 3 semesters of high school, I had good test scores, but really nothing else to show. And for me, this was a whole odyssey where I worked for 2 years. I ended up going to a small women's college that was willing to give me a chance. I tried to transfer out of there after a year, didn't get in anywhere. But after 2 years there, so 4 years after the end of high school, I got in as a transfer to Harvard, Stanford, and Penn. So I had this experience myself, and my students started asking me how to help them. This is more than 20 years ago now. And I think it's a lot like having the Berlin Wall in between you and where you want to go. You've got this barbed wire, you've got these Soviet guards, and it feels impossible. And a lot of, and this wall is metaphorical, but it is not imaginary. This is a real barrier that may well keep the student out of college. And so my students ask me, well, it's a real barrier, even though it's metaphorical. So how do I get around it? And next slide, please. You don't get around it, you get through it. The only way to deal with this wall is to back it up and floor it. I want you to drive at this wall 90 miles an hour. And an example of how to do this, one of my early students who helped inspire these slides was a kid who had been kicked out of high school for cheating. He was leading a cheating ring, really. There was a whole conspiracy to put a keystroke recorder on a teacher's computer. It was very, very bad problem. And when I was advising him on his transfer essay, because he had started out at a community college, and advising him on his transfer essay, the first sentence of that explanation essay was, "I cheated." And I said, that is how to drive at this wall 90 miles an hour, right? That is not shying away from the truth of your wrongdoing. And I think it gives you the best odds of impressing upon the reader that you are ready for a change, right? If the student appears to be hiding the truth, beating around the bush, that is really destructive to their argument that they're going to do things differently next time. And so owning that, as I say, manning up, womaning up, non-binarying up, right? You're just going to adult up and own what you have done. And that's the right approach for your students to take as they write these essays. Next slide, please. All right, think like a lawyer. So I went to law school. I had a 6-year legal career. I've been only a counselor since 2008, but I think that when we're advising these students, boy, especially the ones who have done something terrible, something that really disappointed us, thinking like a lawyer is very helpful. And I think about what that means in this context is that you're helping to be their advocate. You are not their judge. And a lawyer mindset is that the institution, well, I guess if you're reading the application, in that sense, you are their judge. But if you're counseling the student as they're writing, I think that judges, in this case, institutions, are going to make better decisions if students can advocate for themselves, if everybody can tell their side of the story honestly. And lawyer mindset is guilty people need help too, right? So let's assume that your student has done something really disappointing, cheating, committed some kind of violence against another student, all the different kinds of wrongdoing that may have been connected to, bringing substances onto campus that are forbidden. If the student has a lawyer and they give you your permission, it's valuable to talk to that lawyer and make sure that you're not giving them any advice that's going to get them in, especially worse, criminal trouble. But I like the model of thinking about this in the sense that the student's wrongdoing is whatever it is. And right now it's their job to try and make the case for why they should have another shot at education. So that's the mindset I'm aiming for. Next slide, please. So where can these students apply who have, let's say, a suspension or expulsion or a criminal record? And the answer is everywhere. I have seen my students successfully transfer or enter or transfer to every kind of program that's out there. And there are some that are easier to get into, like community colleges and online bachelor's degree programs, but it goes all the way. I've had students who had to make these disclosures get into very selective universities, as well as graduate programs of all kinds. And I've even had a handful of medical school admits in my career after having been expelled from undergrad. And my students are all telling the truth about what happened and disclosing this. So even at the medical school level, which I harp on because I think that's the Mount Everest of US admissions. It's just such a tough get. Even that can be possible for a student who is coming back from some kind of disaster. So next slide, please. So the audience, who is your student writing to? And I hope that some of our colleagues on the call will weigh in who have the personal experience of reading these applications. I think we have to assume a committee. So, you know, most applications are going to go to the admissions office. The mission of the admissions office is pretty straightforward, right? They're trying to admit the strongest possible class at a certain budget. But for these students with the difficult history, very often the folks in the admissions office are asked to collaborate with their colleagues from around the institution. So that might be someone from Dean of Students, from Residence Life, from Public Safety, from the Title IX office, even from the General Counsel's office. And so that's a tough audience to write to try and have an idea of how to speak to them. It's a tough crowd. So if you could forward 2 slides. This is how I think about that task. It's a lot like the task of being a lawyer with a brief before the Supreme Court, because you have this audience of 9. They're really different from one another. You know who they are. They're persuaded by different kinds of authority. They conceive of their job in a different way. And that's much like the committee that's assembled to read one of these special circumstances applications, right? The job of the general counsel is to avert risk for the university, right? That's a really different mindset than the student service model of the admissions office. So the way to talk to a diverse crowd like that is to envision the argument that they're all going to have. They're going to get in a room and discuss what the outcome ought to be. And the task for the student is to put winning arguments in the hands of their friendly readers and to avoid gifting rhetorical weapons to any hostile readers that may be in the room. So you don't want to play into the fears of someone, you know, like Public Safety or General Counsel's office, where they have the perspective of we're trying to keep all the other students safe, right? If you're talking to that part of the crowd, you want to make sure that you don't trigger any worries or fears on the part of those readers. So that's a way to think about it. So next slide, please. So getting started, you know, if you're advising a student who has to make this kind of a disclosure, trust is so important. And of course, it's important with every student. But I think especially when someone is talking about either something that went terribly wrong for them. So someone is maybe disclosing the psychiatric illness that led to the low grades. And they're having to explain that, or they're having to explain their own wrongdoing and the worst and most foolish choice that they ever made. That's really a time when building trust with the student and with their family, if you get to know the family a little bit, and that it's just essential if you're going to support the student in this situation. And I usually recommend that they just start by writing, tell me a story, I say. Write down a memoir, or if there was wrongdoing, a confession, that tells the whole story from beginning to end. And we find the essay within that longer piece they wrote. Now, I mentioned, tell me a story. How do we know if something is a story? Well, a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So next slide, please. Let's skip ahead here. One more or two more slides and see. Telling a story, yes. Okay, so back one. So we see Rocky and his dog. Perfect, thank you so much. So a story has to have a beginning, and a middle, and an end. And I often use Rocky movies as an example of really effective storytelling. And every Rocky movie follows pretty much the same template. They're kind of cookie cutter, but it's a template that works. At the beginning, we have a loser, or in the later movies, we have a has-been, right? And we're going to learn about everything that's mediocre in his life. And then let's scroll through about 3 slides here. Then in the middle of the movie, we get a transformation. We got Rocky drinking raw eggs, and Rocky punching sides of beef, Rocky running around the freezing cold. One more. And then we get Rocky having some kind of victory at the end. He's going toe-to-toe with the champ. So for the students who have to disclose and talk about these kinds of crises in their past, I think of that, everything that happened up to the time that they were disciplined, or up to the time when they had to leave school due to their mental illness or substance abuse, everything up to that point is the beginning. And it might take up 2/3 of the real estate in the essay, but that's all narratively the beginning of the story. And the middle of the story is usually what's happening now at the time that I'm advising the student. So what has happened since then? Hopefully the student has sought some kind of recovery if there was an illness or a substance abuse problem. And the more tangible we can help the student make that recovery story, just like how we see Rocky becoming a better athlete through these concrete actions that he's taking. The middle of the story is where that student says, I've been sober 112 days. I go to this many meetings a week, right? And they can make tangible that recovery, talking about either the school that they've been attending since the problem, whether that was the later parts of high school, whether it's the community college that they're attending now, work that they're doing. This is so important, particularly for students who have had some kind of wrongdoing, showing the consistency and the resiliency. I mean, I think all of us who are adult readers know, if you held a job at Wendy's, these don't have to be fancy sounding jobs. If you held a job at Wendy's for 6 months, there's all kinds of positive things that says about your character, right? It means you can show up on time. It means you take orders. It means at some point you were the low man on the totem pole. Maybe somebody puked in the bathroom and they hand you the mop, right? And if you want to keep that job, you're gonna do what's asked of you. And so talking about those jobs that the students held can be such an important way of illustrating the strength and the transformation that student is going to be bringing to their next campus. And finally, there needs to be some kind of win at the end. And for this, the student being successful after the transfer, that's the win. It hasn't happened yet, but the story in the essay still needs an ending. So they need to talk about what they're going to do next. You give the end of the story, but you express it as a hope, a wish, a dream, right? And talk about what you're going to bring to the table and how you're going to behave at that next college. And that's an essential part of showing that reader what's going to be different and why this isn't going to be a pattern if you get another chance. Next slide, please. So I've got some quick rules here for your students to stick by as they write these essays. So rule one, it's about the recovery, not about the problem. Now I'm using the language of substance abuse recovery here, but this is just as applicable if we're talking about a student who flunked out because they were bereaved or any other type of crisis. The thesis of this essay has to be, here's who I am now. Here's who I have become, having survived the gauntlet of crisis that I described in the beginning of the essay. So ultimately, Rocky is not a story about some loser who's working as a mob enforcer. It's a story about becoming a champion. And that's what these essays need to be. Next slide, please. Number two, answer the question, right? This is something that I'm sure all of us have seen before. It seems so self-evident to us that the essay needs to answer the question that's being asked. And yet we see so many essays where the students struggle to do this. So this is typical language on the Common App. If you check the box saying, yes, I have a disciplinary or criminal record, then you get this prompt. And it says, please give the approximate dates of each incident, explain the circumstances, and reflect. And so it's so obvious to us, and it's not obvious to our students, that they need to go and read that prompt with care and maybe read it out loud so that they're getting every word and say, oh, there are three things that this prompt is asking for. Does my draft answer all three of these requests? Next slide. Find something that was your fault. Okay, so this is important for those students who say, listen, I got this F in this class because I was accused of cheating, but I didn't cheat. All right. I can't know whether my student is telling me the truth about that or not. What I can tell them is this usually doesn't happen at random. Right? Even if you were falsely caught up in a cheating investigation, what did you do? What risky choices perhaps were you making that led them to make this conclusion about you? Because it's often not happening just at random. So during remote learning, this has been very common. I've had a number of students who we're using exam software that required you to have every other window on your computer closed. And the software discovered that they had another window open. My student says, but I didn't cheat. Yeah, my email was open. I just wanted to see if my mom was writing to me. I didn't use this to communicate with someone to help me on the exam. All right, that may be the case. But you need to focus on this essay about how you failed to follow the letter of the law, right? That was a risky choice. You got clear instructions and you didn't follow them. And that's what led to the position that you're in now. And you need to show that ownership, even if you feel that in full or in part you were falsely accused. You don't get anywhere just by being like, I'm innocent. I mean, it may be true, but usually your reader is not that interested. They're not trying to relitigate the question of whether you committed this wrongdoing. They're trying to figure out, who are you now? Will I be glad if I recommend admitting you to our institution? So think about what you did that is your fault, even if it led to a false accusation or a very harsh consequence that you think was not justified. They're interested in your ownership of your actions. So next slide. This is so key. It's about your tone. If the student says, I'm sorry for insert wrongdoing here, but whatever comes after the but doesn't matter, you have negated the sorry. You just totally ruined the sorry by saying, I'm sorry, but if you say, I'm sorry, and then that's going to come across as providing context for your wrong decision, right? I'm sorry, but is going to feel like you're making excuses. I'm sorry, and is offering context. And context is actually a good thing to offer, because if you understand why you made these wrong choices before, then maybe you can fix them, right? And that's what we're worried about if we're reading this. We're thinking, is this person gonna, is it just gonna be the same problem over and over? And so providing that context, showing some insight into how you got it wrong, or how this can be true even if this was something that happened to you, right? It's not your fault that you had mental illness. There's no guilt there. But most of us, myself included, who have had mental illness, didn't necessarily handle it in an optimal way, right? If your depression is making you struggle to attend class, the best thing to do is to write to the teacher, the professor, and say, I want to let you know I'm struggling with this right now. And I'm going to strive to come to class next week. My anxiety is just overwhelmingly right now, right? Most of us don't always handle it perfectly when we're struggling with some challenge that isn't our fault. So showing that insight about how we want to handle these problems in the future is very reassuring to the reader. Next slide. Pity can be earned but not requested. All right. So again, if your student was bereaved, lost their mom, God forbid, and failed out for that reason, and they need to explain that, anybody with a soul who's reading this essay is going to feel bad for the student, and that's fine, right? But if there's even a smell of poor me, woe is me in the essay, that looks bad on everyone, right? So the student should say the facts, let the facts make the case that the student maybe that we ought to feel sorry for the student. If the facts make that case, fine. But you can't say, oh, pity me, take pity on me. It always looks bad. Next slide. All right, this is the last rule. Oh no, there's one more. Application should not repeat itself, but it should rhyme. So if you're helping a student apply to a school that has what I think of as I think about this, the application of a student in special circumstances, I think about it having an offense and a defense like a football team, right? The offense is if there's a transfer essay. So tell us about why you want to be a mechanical engineering major, right? That's part of your offense. You're showing, I'm going to bring these positives to the table. But then if there's also a question about your disciplinary history or about that F you got last semester, that's defense. You're trying to keep the other team from scoring on you. So it's a complicated thing. If you have an application that's going to have both offense and defense in it, it needs to sound like it came from the same person. Sometimes those offense and defense essays can feel a little bit like they came from different planets, and they should be writing in two different genres by the same writer. You want them to resonate. Next slide. Close with an offer to share more. This is all part of owning up, right? Say if you have more questions, if you'd like to see the documents, if you want to see me in person. Show that you don't fear giving more information. And that's another thing that can be reassuring to an institution. So next slide. Final rule, it's still an essay, make it good. I've got Olivia Pope here as an example. I'm not saying that any of these essays should be like a script for a nighttime soap, right? That's not the point. That being said, you can only persuade someone if you first hold their attention. And I think everybody in the room who has been an admissions reader, sometimes I hear from my colleagues that frequently those essays can be pretty dull, and that sometimes reading them is a chore because frequently they sound similar to one another. The one upside of having to write one of these explanation essays is that they are not boring. right? The explanation essays are about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. There is no reason that you shouldn't be able to hold your reader's attention and get your persuasion across. So everything that the student has ever been taught about good writing, things like being concise, having a logical structure, talking about things that they are an expert on their own life. Those are all really good pieces of advice to give these students. Next slide. So if you do, I think 3 more clicks forward, then we'll see all the success stories on one slide. Thank you so much. So yeah, I mean, over the years, I've worked with several hundred of these students who had to make these difficult disclosures, and this is my oxygen. I just live for these students who really can turn things around and do for themselves what I was able to do for my own education. And it's just incredibly gratifying to see those students come back from, what is kind of an academic death, for example, if they've been expelled. Voluntary disclosure, I just wanted to give as an example, a student who'd been struggling with an eating disorder. She did not have to disclose. Right. And those of you who've worked with young women, especially with eating disorders, they often, even during inpatient treatment, even when they are close to death, they are keeping up with their homework. The transcript all looks shiny and perfect. And sometimes this student said, I don't want to go to a college that can't understand this about me. Any school that would hold this against me isn't the right school for me. And so she voluntarily wrote an essay about her struggle, incredibly brilliant essay. She had tremendous options and ended up at a top 5 liberal arts college. I had a student who went to jail for burglary. This was all part of his substance abuse. He would get drunk and break into cars. He was expelled from his college for this reason, and additionally went to jail, went to community college, and was admitted to the University of California. I had a kid, this one actually, as you can imagine, most of my students in this category do not want to put their picture on my website, but this guy gave me a picture to put on my website. This is the one who was expelled from high school for cheating, ended up at Cornell. He is now one of 3 people I know in the world who has a GED and a Harvard Law degree. I'm one of the 3 and he's another. Last one, I had a kid who was expelled under Title IX. His former girlfriend accused him of sexual misconduct. This was a multi-year saga working with him. He went to community college, eventually was able to transfer with full disclosure of everything that had happened at the first college. Got into a good public flagship. From there, I worked with him on his medical school applications. Again, with full disclosure, he applied to 80 medical schools in the US and he got into 1. But 1's all you need. And I was working with him last year on his residency applications, and he's a doctor now. So next slide. Let's go I think 3 clicks forward so we get 3 bullet points. Yeah, thank you. So I'm wrapping up the formal part of the presentation, and hopefully we can have some time for Q&A, and for I hope for folks in the audience to volunteer their experiences and wisdom from their expertise. But I tell my students who are just despairing, they say, I ruined everything. And there is no asterisk on my Harvard degree, all right? Not on either one of them. Does not say flunked out of high school, worked for 2 years, GED, went to a different school, got here when she was 22. None of that. It says class of 99. And what we're helping this student work toward is that point in their life when no one's going to know or care about that crisis that happened when they were young, right? You earn that college degree, you're a graduate, period. And you don't have to be, you don't have to have some kind of shame hanging over your head for the rest of your life. And this is one thing America gets right. There's so many things there's so many failures in our education system, and so much lack of access, and so many things that are conditioned on whether you're middle class and whether you can afford tuition. One thing that America does better than a lot of our peer countries is that there are a lot more ways from point A to point B in our system than in many other rich countries. So, if my story happens in France, in Japan, if you melt down in high school and you blow your shot at going to college through, there's really one way to do it, and you do it through these exit exams that they have at the end of high school. So many country systems are based on that. They don't have systems where, maybe when you're 26 and you have a couple of kids, you can go back to community college at night, and you can still end up on whatever path to being a teacher, a lawyer, doctor, whatever you hoped. America's actually good at this. And this is something that we can have a lot of pride in, and help students. Now, our system, of course, is incredibly complicated, and the students need guidance from us in order to make it work. But there are so many paths from point A to point B. And even after prison, after a student who got pregnant or is parenting at a time earlier than they planned, students who have been expelled or suspended for some terrible mistake that they made, you can come back from all of these things, and we can help the students do it. And this is my life's work. I love it so much, and thank you all for giving me a chance to tell you about it. So I'd love for anybody who wants to unmute themselves, and we can unshare the slides at this point, Tina, if you don't mind. I'd love for us to all be able, thank you, all be able to see each other and ask me questions or volunteer the wisdom of your experience. So I see a question in the chat. What about privacy issues on mental health hospitalizations and self-harm? Always want the psychiatrist to clear the next step. Does it help to have a letter from the same? Yes, it can be helpful if your student is in recovery to have a supplemental kind of a recommendation letter from someone who was involved in their treatment, who can say, here's the prognosis, this is how far this student has come, and here's why I'm confident that they're ready for the next step. That can be really helpful. And the privacy issues, all of this belongs to the student. And so our job is to try and help that student make an informed decision about how much they want to share. And, if I mentioned the student with the eating disorder, if she had not wanted to share, I would not push her. That story belongs to her, and the right to be private about it belongs to her too. Oh, for the Varsity Blues students that were kicked out, it seems they were victims of their parents. How did you advise them? Well, that is what I thought, is that they were victims of their parents. Many of the admissions officers at colleges that I spoke to about them felt the same way. But for the most part, this was really tough. There were many deans of admission who I spoke to who said, listen, I'm willing to, we'll bring the students in, we'll interview them, tell them to apply. I can't make any promises, but we'll look. And then that same dean was calling me back often a day later and saying, it's a no-go. I spoke to the president's office. They said, absolutely not. And so one of the things that we ended up advising a lot of those students was to go to college abroad, because all of this is less, one thing about those families is that they had financial resources. So since they were able to afford going to college abroad, that was a better solution for a number of those kids, because many US schools were just so overwhelmed by the risk of public exposure. Everybody knew whose parents had been charging, and I'm not even just talking about the parents who were famous to begin with, but just, the parents who were, did a perp walk and were paraded in front of the federal courthouse in Boston. Everybody knew who those kids were, and the schools were so scared of the headlines, would be Whoville College admits cheaters. And so a lot of the college presidents were saying, absolutely not, we can't go there. So even though I think The admissions officers were often convinced that the kids were victims of their parents and, had the potential to learn from this experience. The institutions thought that the PR risk was just too high, and those kids mostly didn't have a lot of options. So more questions or themes that you want to bring up in the last 3 minutes? Okay, well, I want to encourage everyone. I'm going to put my email address in the chat. As you could tell from my talk today, I love talking about this. Please, if you'd love to continue, if you either have questions for me or you just want to continue the conversation, I'm always excited to talk to my colleagues about these issues. And thank you so much for coming to this session. I hope it was valuable for you.